Great. So, have you had a good time? And did you learn anything? Did you walk away angry? Okay, well, this was not a Trump rally. This was G1, Japan. So we are standing between you and a wonderful party. But I think during the day, there were a lot of buzzwords that were going around. And it was really, sort of the first time in the 15-year history of the G1 summits, that really it was very clear that Japan has a lot to offer. That Japan doesn't need to be envious of the progress that's going on in the rest of the world, but that Japan has indeed strengths, has community, has humanity that is admired in the world. Now, to put things a little bit into perspective, Gillian, is spent a lot of time in Japan in the 1990s, but apart from being a brilliant financial journalist, her background is actually in anthropology. So, Gillian, if you don't mind, I want to put you on the spot, and if you wouldn't mind sort of putting Japan in the current here and now in the global situation, put Japan a little bit into context from your perspective.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Jesper. And it's a great honor to be participating today. And I'm very sorry I can't be with you in person. I will be in Japan later this year, but sadly could not be there this week, which is sad for me because I love Japan. I was a journalist in Japan in the late 1990s, and that was an era when many Japanese worried about the problem of Japan passing, because many journalists and many Western political and business leaders were focused primarily on China and often used to ignore Japan. And I would argue that today there's a very different situation in that not only is there growing concern about dealing with China, there's almost a China passing phenomena, but there's a growing realization that Japan has an incredibly important geopolitical and geostrategic position right now. That's partly because of its leadership role in a number of areas of key technology, whether it's shipbuilding or whether it's robotics or advanced machinery, life sciences. I can tell you, sitting in Cambridge University, we're extremely grateful for the fact that Cambridge University has a lot of partnerships with Japanese institutions. And in fact, just to cite one example, our lead quantum laboratory is actually being backed both by a Japanese company and also Cambridge. In fact, I was meeting the deputy ambassador just on Friday to talk about this. But aside from the significant role of Japan in global technology, Japan's role in geopolitics is also critical, given that where it sits in Asia. And I would argue that its role in terms of a vision of capitalism is also even more important today as the world undergoes major fluxes in how it both views geopolitics and, most crucially, the political economy. And by that I mean that I think today we are at a very important junction point in two respects. The first is the fact that the post-World War II geopolitical order, which was based on the idea of the Western allies essentially collaborating together, initially in opposition to the Soviet Union, but then essentially as a group that thought they were essentially running the world, that vision of the post-World War II allies is crumbling quite dramatically. So we are no longer in a world where Bretton Woods, where the G7, where the allies and the allied spirit dominate. Secondly, though, equally importantly, the post-World War II era of the political economy was marked by two dominant threads. The first, between 1945 and really the early 1980s in the West, was essentially a kind of Keynesian vision of the economy, which assumed that domestically, the government had a role to play in terms of managing economic cycles and demand management. And internationally, the idea was that the Western countries and other countries should collaborate around the Bretton Woods institutions for the benefit of everybody. And that era was really marked by an idea that collaboration was better than cooperation. And it was marked by a focus on absolute welfare, not relative welfare. Or to put it crudely, the idea that if countries collaborated, they would all become richer and better off. And what really mattered was whether one country was wealthier than it had been 10 or 20 years ago, rather than whether one country was wealthier than its neighbors. And then on top of that, in the 1980s onwards, that vision was then overlaid with a new adoption of neoliberal free market views championed by people like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, which basically argued that markets ruled supreme. The more free that a market could be, the better, which meant that essentially globalization and free trade and free markets were seen as basically very desirable goals that everyone should chase. Shareholder capitalism, like Milton Friedman said, became absolutely dominant from the 1980s onwards in the West. Japan, of course, always had a rather different vision of capitalism, which was more about stakeholder capitalism. But that was swept aside, if not scorned, by many American commentators in the late 20th century. And the idea that really was dominant 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, was that free markets were good, globalization was good, but global collaboration was also very important. Today, we're in a radically different world, because essentially we're seeing the rise of what might be called geoeconomics or geofinance, which is more similar to the political economy mentality we saw about 100 years ago between World War I and World War II. And this shift in mentality is epitomized by Donald Trump. But I would argue that although President Trump is both reflecting the shift in mentality and dramatically accelerating it, he wasn't really the person who first originated it, because in many ways, the rise of geoeconomics has occurred because of the rise of China's position and strength on the world stage, because China is a country which very much adopts geoeconomics. And you can see the rise of geoeconomics through events like Brexit a few years ago. And essentially the hallmarks of geoeconomics is, firstly, a move in mentality away from focusing on absolute welfare to relative welfare, and a focus on power. Essentially, geoeconomics is all about seeing economic policy as a tool of national statecraft and a desire by a nation to assert itself in terms of its strength on the world stage and in competition with its neighbors or other countries. So geoeconomics is a mentality that moves away from a focus on international collaboration to extreme economic competition and, if you like, forms of protectionism, of populism, of extreme patriotism, the 3 Ps, or nationalism, and where essentially economic policymaking is seen as a tool of political policymaking and diplomatic policymaking rather than standing in a sphere of its own. It's quite a different mentality for people who've been raised in the neoliberal economic order, which tended to see economics as sitting in a category of its own, separate from politics. And the rise of geoeconomics also has implications for how we imagine capitalism and companies. Because ironically, although the rise of geoeconomics and geofinance is associated with right-wing governments in the West, which have historically been pro-free market, people like President Trump and other European leaders are coupling their right-wing political views with a lot of government intervention in business and markets and the economy. Essentially, there's a new type of stakeholderism that's developing, which affects how we imagine companies, but not stakeholderism as we imagined it 10 years ago with the rise of ESG, but rather the new stakeholders which matter are national security interests, right-wing cultural values, and what might be called the popular man. And those are the considerations which are impacting onto the way that companies now run their affairs in places like America and parts of Europe. Why does this matter for Japan? Well, as I say, Japan has a lot to teach the wider world about capitalism because stakeholderism has always been present in Japan's vision of capitalism. Stakeholderism has taken place in terms of a focus on workers' rights, on the environment, on social issues. But I am quite sure that if Japan is now moving into an era when it's looking after its national strategic interests as well, it's very natural for Japanese companies to work with the government in that respect. But secondly, I would argue that Japan's vision of stakeholderism in the last few decades has been, in some ways, gentler, more socially embedded, perhaps a bit nicer than many other visions of stakeholderism. And Japan's very strong commitment to international collaboration and the idea of trying to focus on absolute welfare, i.e. everybody getting wealthier rather than relative welfare, is very, very important. Japan has been a steadfast supporter of international organizations for many decades. And we badly need those principles today because a slide into a world marked purely by geoeconomics and vicious competition is a slide towards a very dangerous world. So I would urge Japan to stand up and use its voice on the world stage today, both to champion stakeholderism and capitalism, but also to remind everyone, including, if not especially, America today, the importance of global collaboration and the threats that happen if we lose it. Thank you.
Great, Gillian, fantastic. I don't know whether you can hear, you got a nice round of applause. Now, Robin, you know, sort of this kinder and gentler touch that Japan offers while might is right being brutally enforced by the dominant hyperpower in America. Your take on this?
Wonderful to be here. I've had the pleasure of joining this wonderful Yoshi and the group on the G1 conference, but always via, well, like Gillian, actually, via online only. So it's a real thrill to be here with you all in person this time and have a chance to compare notes with a great panel. Look, I know time is tight, so let me jump in and give you my impression. Maybe I'll come at this from a more explicitly security angle first, the Pax Japonica theme, and then come round to specifically some of the answers, maybe pick up where Gillian was leaving off at the end. I can cut right to the chase at the beginning and say I agree entirely with Gillian on the fundamental framing she's given. We've moved from a world of absolute gains, win-win, as some countries used to call it. Win-win was a nice word. Win-win is now treated, obviously, as a different type of term. We've gone from win-win, absolute gains, to zero-sum. You know, if somebody else wins, you're losing, etc. It is all built, in my mind, around, and I think Gillian was implying this, the US-China contest. I've written about this as being a new Cold War a couple of years ago. Nothing that's happened since I published that has changed my mind. Now, I'm not the only one to use that phrase. It is a little bit contested, but it seems to me it's often contested by people who think that if you say it, you will make it happen. I'd rather recognize what is happening and deal with it. Actually, we've got a history of handling Cold Wars. Cold Wars with rules aren't too bad. Multipolarity, which much of the emerging market world thinks would be better, in my experience and knowledge of history, tends to be more chaotic and more dangerous. So, you know, a Cold War doesn't have to be a bad thing as long as the two sides can work it out. So I think this raises 6 questions. I'm going to go straight for Japan. Okay, straight for Japan. The first one is, can it trust the US? That was the theme of one of the breakout panels I attended this morning, and it was also the theme of the opening plenary. Obviously, a lot of focus on the untrustworthiness of Donald Trump. And as Gillian was saying, Donald Trump is more symptom than cause, completely agree. The question is, will America continue this way and be the same in 4 years or 8 years' time? I'm going to hazard a guess that any America in the future is going to need to have allies to deal with a new Cold War with China. They won't be able to do it alone, and that means that they will probably need allies again. They'll go back to being tough, brutal, self-interested leaders of alliances, but I think we've got to be careful as Europeans and as Japan to assume that Donald Trump is the pure future of American foreign policy. In the end, America's superpower is allies, and I think although we're not going to go back to being able to rely on them the way we should, we need to spend on our own defense, etc., I don't think we end up in that sort of conflictual world where America has abandoned us, point one. And that influences a bit how we think about things. Second, we've not talked as much about where China's going to go. If I think the world is a new Cold War between the US and China, I'm taking Gillian's line and amping it up a bit, as they say, then China's stability or not, its self-confidence or not, are critically important. And I've not heard one word, there's one word I haven't heard mentioned yet today, maybe it was in another panel, Taiwan. You know, one thing I understand is Taiwan kind of sits at the end of Japan. If you follow the Ryukyu island chain all the way down, yes, Bill, I think I'm right. I'm not an expert on Japan. Many others here are. But I think my geography is right. And to shorthand it, my view of Taiwan is it is an existential threat to the Communist Party of China. It is the missile of democracy aimed at the Communist Party of China. It must not succeed. It must not survive as it is, because if it does, it undermines the credibility of the Communist Party of China. So at some point, this is going to be a thing. We can pretend it isn't a thing today. I was in Taiwan about 2 months ago. I think everyone wants to live with the status quo there, but the status quo is an easy thing to say. It's a difficult thing to preserve. So Japan cannot ignore the Taiwan question. I'll simply say that and say more about it later on. I've not heard, third, much said about South Korea. South Korea and Japan are the two countries that really rely on America for their security going forward. Both have tried to preserve an effective economic relationship with China while being America's principal security ally in the region. Trying to do both those things in a Cold War, where you rely on America for your security, and security has to be at the top of the hierarchy of interests, is not possible. So Japan and South Korea have to be closer together. They sort of have edging towards each other. I understand a very difficult relationship, obviously. I was in South Korea recently, and I was very struck that President Lee Jae-myung seems to be being more pragmatic than one might have thought. So it'll be interesting to see how the new leadership in Japan plays that card. Fourth, ASEAN is as squeezed as Japan and South Korea. I think countries across Southeast Asia thought they had a really good deal in the new Cold War. They could play both sides. That wonderful phrase you all know, China plus one, yeah? We will be the way that Chinese companies can continue selling to America or to Europe. We'll be the way that European and American companies that still have supply chains in China can continue selling to those countries. What a great idea, until Donald Trump comes along and says, China plus one? I call that circumvention. I call that transshipment. You will not get away with that deal. I'm going to, rip it up and try and make your lives more complicated. 40% for you guys who do transshipment. And so the question is, ASEAN, I think, is in a much more vulnerable position than it was even 2 years ago. Japan, as I've heard today, and it's true, is a great partner to ASEAN. It's going to be even more important in these coming years because we're in a journey together. Last 2 points. Europe, first of all. Again, heard a little less about Europe. As a Brit, as a European, therefore, can we be reliable partners for you in this new Cold War, in this new geoeconomics, this new geopolitics? I don't know. Russia is our biggest threat. Russia poses an existential threat to European security. If Ukraine loses, Europe loses. We can say more about it. But in the end, the key bond between us, which I think is essential, is we're all small countries. As they famously say, there are those countries that know they're small and those that don't. Britain is a small country, or smaller. Medium size is a polite word, but when you look at the scale of America and China, we're smaller. And so Japan, Britain, France, Germany, the EU, we're in it together. And we're going to have to find ways to work it together. And I think it's probably principally on the geoeconomic side that Gillian was referring to, where we really need to team up. We're very far away from each other from a security standpoint, but on critical supply chains, on being trusted investors in each other's markets, both on the same side of the new Cold War, I think there's a possibility for the future. And the last point I wanted to make was about India, a complicated country that does not want to be part of a new Cold War. But that nonetheless finds itself dragged into bits of it now and again. The Japan-India relationship, I think, is a fascinating one maybe we can talk more about, but I think critical for the future. So I think there's a frame to this. It's zero-sum. I use the phrase Cold War because I think it's going to be around for at least the next 20 years. This is the reality. So how we manage it and how we navigate it. Japan has some very difficult choices to take, but is not alone. And it can play, I think, a very important role in adjusting to this new world.
Fantastic. So now, why you love G1? Because we're going to do a hard pivot from all this scary stuff to Sensei, right? Sensei is spiritual. He's the leader of one of the great Zen sects. He is also the most popular, year in, year out, the most popular teacher at Stanford University. He teaches spirituality. So Sensei, with all this hard and scary stuff going on, what does Japan bring? Where is spiritual? Where does your perspective come into play?
Thank you very much. So I do not want you to have too much expectations. But these days I'm appointed as Goodwill Ambassador of the tourism in Kyoto, and I'm hosting a lot of VIPs. And of course, we have many inbound people coming to Japan. But, so I always ask them, why there's a lot of destination to visit. Why did you choose Japan? Why do you come to Kyoto? And many of us say that Japan or the Kyoto has philosophy or the thought, very different, unique. I think this is very important part of Japan. And for example, so I think as there's a lot of the spiritual influence of Japanese culture or attitude of Japanese people. One of the biggest characteristics of Japan is unclearness, right? So I think this comes from the teachings of Buddhism. So in special terms, we call it the funi. So I think this is the most important teachings in this era. It means we should avoid dualism. So dualism is, for example, we tend to judge people, he's a good person, he's a bad person. But for example, within myself, I have good aspects, and also I have bad aspects, and it's always changing. So there's teachings that in Buddhism that we have to accept all the aspects as they are, as one. So this kind of the uniqueness is very important. And the world is how can I say, polarized, divided. But Japan is not so divided compared to other countries. Harmonized, peace. I think because of these teachings. And of course, there's a light, there's a shade. So, for example, unclear attitude, unclear leaders. But thanks to this how can I say, philosophies, Japan is keeping harmonized societies compared to other countries. And I think that this is one of the things that we should teach to the world, and we should be proud of it.
Teach undecidedness. Fantastic. Sensei, I asked him of his day, and he was busy in the morning, but in the afternoon he attended a couple of the sessions. And what was your most interesting session? And he said, immigration. So Sensei, as a spiritual leader, talk to us about immigration into Japan.
So I think 2-3 months ago, I was hearing the interview of Elon Musk. And he was always saying crazy things. But sometimes he says something to deserve to listen. And he said that now the Western countries, the society is breaking, collapsing. I think he says because of the Western society is based on the Christianity. So the most important things in Christianity is love and compassion. So Western society has had too much compassion for others. And he said, look, East Asia, China, Japan, Singapore, right? They do not accept immigrants, no refugees. So this kind of the compassion, too much compassion, broke the Western societies. And I think in some sense, it's true. And for example, 2 weeks ago, I had a guest from Singapore, and he was carrying, when he visited our temple, he was carrying plastic box of kimchi, right? And I asked him, why do you carry this kimchi bag, the box? And he said, he couldn't find any garbage box in the city. And he said, Kyoto is the city of least garbage box. And for example, our temple has, the size is 80 acres, no garbage box, but totally clean. Because, so Japanese people has a discipline. So we're taught from elementary school, kindergarten, that we should do anything for ourselves. So I think so in the discussion of the immigrations, so they're talking about the laws or some, of course, money or the business things. But I think it's wrong. It is a question of discipline. And so Japan is discipline-based countries. For example, before I started the trainings in the monasteries, I have a big questions. Japanese Buddhist priests are allowed to get married, allowed to drink alcohol. We can eat anything, meat, fish, anything. But other Buddhist countries, all forbidden. Why? Right? And in my 3rd year, my master gave me a chance to go to the Chinese monastery, train with the Chinese trainees. And I found something. In China, there are a lot of rules. No marriage, no meat, no alcohol, many other rules. But I found that disciplines are very loose. For example, when they're supposed to meditate, most of them are sleeping. When they're supposed to clean the garden, they don't clean the garden like the gardens in Kyoto. Japan is opposite. Rules are not so strict, but the disciplines are very strict because we're, how can I say, raised as discipline-based culture. So I think if we accept immigrants, it is not question of the money or the positions, but they're supposed to have disciplines.
Hold that thought. Judeo-Christian versus Japan, funiki, whatever that is, right? Gillian, hard pivot, AI, and Judeo-Christianism, Shintoism, Japan spirituality. Give us your pitch.
Well, thank you, Jesper, and thank you to both the speakers for very, very interesting interventions that I've learned a lot from, so thank you. We were talking earlier about the issue of AI because King's College in Cambridge is where Alan Turing studied, the founder of AI, and in fact, we're about to have a big conference this week on AI and society. And there's a group at Cambridge called the Centre for Future Intelligence, which has been looking a lot at the cross-cultural differences in terms of attitudes towards AI. And one of the issues that's quite relevant for immigration now for Japan is that ever since I worked in Japan in the 1990s, I've been very struck by the difference in attitude towards AI and robots between Japanese culture and American and European culture. And in particular, Japan has been wildly enthusiastic about robots and AI for a long time, and very positive. To my knowledge, it's the only country where even the unions have been championing automation in a positive way. In the West, by that I mean in America and the UK and much of Europe, continental Europe, there's been a real hostility towards robots and AI for a long time. And if you ask why, it's partly because of demographics, because Japan is running short of workers and know that they need more workers. And I think one of the facets of Japanese culture, which is not often commented on, is that I think many Japanese voters, if they were asked to choose between an AI-enabled platform or a robot, or that tries to fit in with Japanese culture, as opposed to an immigrant who doesn't, they would prefer the robot and automation. But that also reflects something else more subtle, which is that back in the late 20th century, Japanese culture was very positive about AI and automation through things like Astro Boy and popular cultural forms. Whereas in the West, there was a tremendous amount of fear and hostility towards AI and robots, expressed in movies like 2001 AT, the science fiction, or Star Trek, or Star Wars, or if you're British, Doctor Who. And the idea always was that robots and AI was something scary that came down on top of us as a kind of authority figure that was going to control us or kill us all. Whereas in Japan, AI and robots were seen much more as part of our tribe and on the same level as us. And if you ask why that was, then there's something else even more interesting. I was going to shut the door, which is that the creators of Astro Boy have suggested that one of the reasons why the attitude is different is because Shinto religion does not draw a clear line between animate objects and inanimate, between objects that are alive and have brains and souls, and between those that don't. Because, of course, in Shintoism, and to some degree in Buddhism, the idea is that even a rock or a worm or a tree or a mountain has a soul. And if you think that, then it's much easier to accept the idea that an AI-enabled robot may also have some kind of soul or be actually on a spectrum between human and non-human. However, Judeo-Christian tradition tends to draw a very strict line between animate and inanimate objects. So it's much more frightening to imagine that something which is not obviously human might actually have a brain and soul. And I can't stress this strongly enough, the difference in attitude towards AI and robots in Japan is very important, partly because it shows that it's not just Silicon Valley bros, not just Silicon Valley Americans who should be talking about how AI and human interaction is going to evolve, even though Silicon Valley tends to act as if they alone have the monopoly on truth. They don't. So Japan needs to talk much more about different attitudes towards AI and robots, but also because when you include the issue of automation into any discussion about the economic future of countries like Japan, it looks quite different if you just look at demographics. Paul Volcker, who was a friend of mine, used to say that what mattered for Japan was not absolute GDP, but GDP per capita, because that looked quite different. However, if you add in AI and automation, it looks quite different again. And that changes the complexion of the debate around immigration.
Excellent. Sensei, animate, inanimate, Judeo-Christian. Did you play with Astro Boy?
Yeah, so as Julian-san said, so I think it is something to do with the reincarnations. So reincarnation is the concept of the Asian concept. And for example, in Tibetan Buddhism, so they believe they reincarnate only in animals. So, but as Julian-san said, so in Japan, we believe we can reincarnate to anything. And from ancient times, there is a kind of the ceremonies which is called as Ningyo Kuyo. So even dolls have a Buddha nature, spirits. And when we throw away, we have to have the ceremonies to give the gratefulness and also for the spirits. So from ancient times, we have this kind of the traditions. And also in Kyoto, you can find very interesting tomb for bacterian yeast. So in Manshuin Temple. So I think it's, if I explain this to the European people, so some of them can understand. But American people, Australian people, they can understand why do you pray for the East. But in Japan, we have this kind of a culture that everything has a Buddha nature and the spirits. So I think it can apply to the robots and the AIs, even if they have no, like I said, lives. Yes.
It's wonderful that you bring up the bacteria, because as you know, there's a temple in Tokyo, I forget the name, where you discard your old needles, right? And the way you do that is you stick them into tofu. And the reason is that there is the needle that all its life spent being hard and piercing through things. And so before you discard the needle, you allow the needle that feeling of being into something soft and gentle. Anyway, I thought that was very nice. Now, Robin, you know, you're at the hard edge of things. Bring it back down together, your reaction to the discussion on spirituality.
So I'm very struck by the points that both Julian and Sensei Daiko made about the kind of fear of technology in the West. Yeah, we have Terminator, we have Westworld, yeah? It's all going wrong. I think Julian put a finger right on it. And I think this description, I hadn't thought about it, the animate versus inanimate, and the idea that there's a kind of flow, I find very compelling. I think I have a slightly different take to Sensei Daiko on the immigration question. First of all, I mean, Elon Musk may be right about certain things. I don't think he's right about immigration. In the end, what he believes, I think, is that whiter migration is fine and dark migration is bad. So, and I don't subscribe to that view at all. I think in Europe and Eurasia, we're a flow. Yeah, people literally move from space to space. It goes, you know, we had Islam running half of Spain for centuries. You almost have to be more inclusive than the other way around. I've noticed that Donald Trump, you know, is trying to encourage white migration from South Africa, but he wants to prevent certain other types of migration from other parts of the world. And I'm afraid I think Elon Musk is very much in that space and supporting Tommy Robinson. In any case, this is UK politics. I won't bore you with it. And I don't think it's because we're Judeo-Christian. Too much compassion. Don't buy that either. I think everyone can be compassionate, and it's not tied just to religion, compassion. It comes from something deeper, something spiritual, as you said, about believing the Buddha nature is in everyone. So I think that compassion is important, but it's not what's driven it. Actually, it's a very boring thing. The law in Europe has not been adapted since the Second World War. The treatment of refugees, by law, you know, you have to be open. Angela Merkel had to make a decision in 2015. Did they start shooting? the Syrian refugees coming across the border, they let them in. The problem we've had is that we've not adapted our laws so that legal migration is possible, and we've ended up creating avenues for illegal migration. And illegal migration will destroy the politics of any country and has to be tackled. And so I'm with them on that. But the last point I want to make is about identity. Again, this is where immigration becomes so important. I think of being a Briton or being English or being British is about values. It's not about the religion. It's not about skin color. It's not about even about nationality. Are you tolerant? Do you respect the rights of other individuals? Do you buy into the rule of law and non-autocracy? All of those kinds of things, I think, are fundamental to us. Nationalism is a bad thing in Europe. It is the root of war. Patriotism is good. Nationalism is dangerous. And the Trumpian Musk side is nationalist, not patriotic. And I think is the source of a lot of risk. So when I look at the English football team, there's a famous play about it now in the UK about, you know, This Is England, it's called, all about Gareth Southgate. You look at the England football team, it is just a mix. You can't place who's from where. They are a blend. And it's the strength, I think, of England and Britain is that strength. So we've got to get migration right, but immigration can be a strength. It just has to be managed right.
I'm very glad that you brought up football because, as you know, next year is the World Cup, and there are rumors in my home country, Germany, that we will win the World Cup. And the reason for that is that we will allow for the Japanese players who play in the Bundesliga to actually play for the German team. Now, very quick, and all three of you, please be hyper-professional. Lightning round. You've got less than 1 minute to answer. The Japanese the next Prime Minister of Japan, what's the one piece of advice you give him, or should I say her or him? Gillian, 30 seconds.
Speak out on the world stage. Japan's voice is needed. It has been very reticent and self-effacing. Japan has a lot to teach the wider world today, and it should. Excellent.
Sensei. Have you ever been invited for advice to the Prime Minister?
No.
No. All right, okay. Maybe that's the problem.
But I think the confidence is very important. Confidence. So Japan is, so I think the younger generations also, they do not go out. But if we go out, so we find the charms or the good things about Japan and be confident. And I also say that speak out.
Fantastic. Sensei?
If I'm a sensei, that's great. So I was trying to think of an idea. I think this morning, Mizuno-san took I wondered if you're going to do a one-question energy, getting energy policy right in Japan. You cannot have a safe Japan, a successful Japan, and even on AI or on any of these issues without access to energy. But that's been said already. So I will go back to my opening remarks. Start to talk to the Japanese people about the danger in the world. Be open, be frank about it. Don't infantilize the Japanese people by pretending that the world isn't dangerous out there. Sadly, it is. As I said earlier, if it's a new Cold War, it's a new Cold War. You know, fix it, work with it, rules. But we're going to have to make some very difficult choices. Strong countries will be freer countries.
Excellent. Now, your time has come. German rules, 30 seconds to ask a question. If there's no question within 30 seconds, a bottle of champagne for each of the panelists here.
Long questions.
Please state, whom you would like the question to be answered. Somebody, please. Yep. Don't be shy.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Jonathan. I'm a full-time student here at GLOBIS this year. I would like to pose a question both to Roger and to the Reverend Wright. So you'd mentioned there's this difference in values between the Judeo-Christian West and the Buddhist East. I wonder if we can find commonality in some of the dialogue that's already been done. Like there is a principle of respecting the understanding of another, right? The Jesuits have a strong foundation in this, and I wonder if that can contribute to the Pax Japonica. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Sensei, commonalities.
Actually, I was born in a Buddhist temple, but I studied at Christian schools when I was junior high school and high school. So I had 6 years Christian education. So I learned a lot from Christianities. And this is of course, as I'm Buddhist priest, so I'm teaching the Buddhist teachings for the world. But what I learned from Christianity is that dedication and love and compassion. And we need more, as Elon says, so our society needs more compassion and love for the people. So I think that we should learn from different religions and their perspectives, and that this kind of the exchange is very important. And from 20 years ago, we have the exchange program with the Christianity and Zen temples with exchange of the trainees. So I think we should continue this kind of activities, and we learn from other religions to make the world better. So,
Gillian, your take.
I think that right now we all need to learn from each other, and there is a tremendous danger in the world today, which is that digital technologies, in theory, should expose us all to the wider world and make us all able to learn from each other in a way that was once unimaginable. In practice, the way the tech companies have designed the algorithms takes us down rabbit holes that essentially create echo chambers and reinforce tribalism and a narrow mind. We have to fight against that.
Thank you, Gillian. Any additional questions, comments? Hori-san and the lady in the back. Yeah, right there. Let's lump 2 or 3 questions together.
Sure. Hi, Sinead, I'm with Fujitsu. We were cut short on the comment between Japan and India. And, you know, I visit India a lot as someone working in software, very impressed with their AI capabilities. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the comment about the Japan-India relationship.
Excellent. Japan, India. Hori-san?
I have a question to Sensei about immigration. I just wonder, how can we succeed in including more immigration into Japan? You mentioned about discipline, but what else? What do you think we should do to make it more harmonizing for the people to accept the people from outside?
Great, fantastic. One more, young man.
Regarding the question about immigration, will there be a point where AI and robotic replace the need for immigration at all?
Excellent. One more? Anybody else? Up in the front here. Harry.
What role should Japanese defense corporations play in the targets across the world to increase defense spending up to 2, 3, 4% of GDP?
Wonderful. We've got the hot buttons here. We've got India, immigration, and defense. India.
What would I say about more about India? Well, I brought it up in the context of Japan. Obviously, the whole concept of the Indo-Pacific area was a Shinzo Abe concept, which the Indians are very, very happy to roll onto. And certainly the Biden administration looking to try to cement its pivot to Asia with an additional partner, i.e. India. This made absolute sense. So I think there is a strong, I'm afraid, security component as well, if I can call it that, to the concept of the Japan-India relationship, not least because it brings in the United States, or has done traditionally until Donald Trump turned up so far. But I think at the heart of it, and what's going to be interesting from a business standpoint, is whether Japan's offer to India is better than China's offer to India. In the end, China, to state the obvious, has excess capacity it needs to export. And even if it is embracing automation itself, it is embracing automation still to be able to drive a greater GDP growth that is not being fully absorbed by its own internal consumption. So the fear, as I understand it in India, is that getting closer to China is going to end up presenting with economic challenges rather than opportunities. Japan, on the other hand, already a large investor, as you note, from your own company, as is Suzuki and others that have long-term relationships there, can, I think, be better partners, potentially, helping India move up the value chain, sharing technology, more offshore investment, without India feeling within this geo-economic world that it could be a source of threat or dependence that is then played against it later on in this new Cold War contest. And then India stays on the right side of the US, while at the same time taking economic opportunities.
Fantastic. Immigration.
Yes, and a little comment about India. So in G20 countries, so only India and Japan is a polytheism-based country, right? So other countries are monotheism-based countries. So I think that India can, like I said, the spirituality of India can accept AI or these kind of things easier compared to the monotheism countries. And that's the Hori-san's question, immigration. So I'm one of the board members of the Kyoto City Education. And so it's very, very important to teach the disciplines for the kids of the immigrants. And so yesterday I saw the newspaper that the 3% of the newborn children is the international the children in Japan last year. And I think it is increasing rapidly. And also we will accommodate more immigrants. And so there are a lot of the children who can speak Japanese and away from the societies. I think it is very, very dangerous. So we're trying to accommodate, of course, the language, and also so we're trying to teach the disciplines. So the education in the especially elementary school is fantastic in Japan. And there is a documentary film of the elementary school, which was open to the public this year, and it was viral in European countries, especially Finland and these kind of countries. But I think there's as a hint to accommodate the international immigrants to Japan and teach how to, like I say, act with the disciplines.
Excellent. Gillian, do you want to tackle defense cooperation?
Yeah, I'll say two obvious things. One is that Japan needs to build up its military-industrial complex. I hate to say this, it's tragic. I hate war, having been a war reporter, but that's just the reality. So it needs to work on developing its own independent military-industrial supply chains. Japan deserves a lot of credit for having been almost the only Western country which has been stockpiling rare earth minerals and magnets in recent years. It did that partly because China cut it off about 15 years ago, and it learned the right lesson and has since created a big stockpile. America has been shockingly slow to stockpile essential rare earth minerals and magnets, and that's why it's currently in the situation it now is, and much of Europe is the same. And so the other point I'll stress is that cooperation is needed amongst allies and amongst friends on the military-industrial side very badly right now. And I would urge Japanese companies to seize that opportunity as fast as they can.
Excellent. Any additional questions from the audience? Hey.
Thank you, Joseph Perkins. Many of the issues discussed today are so much bigger than any one of us, and could result in feelings of despair or helplessness because they are so large. What is your recommendations that individuals can do? What are the actions that we can take to move things in the right direction?
We're all looking to the spiritual leader.
So, of course, it's very difficult questions, but I think if myself is not in peace, we cannot make my family in peace. And if my family is not in peace, we cannot make the community in peace. So I think it's starting from ourselves to be in peace is very important. So, and now, so we have a lot of things to do and always busy. So busy means in Japanese, it lose our sense, lose our mind. So you have to reflect yourself first, and the breathing is very important. So in Chinese character, breath can be written in our own mind. So if you get irritated, upset, our breath can be very shallow. So starting having deep breathing, it's very important, yes, for the peace of myself.
Gillian.
I'm not going to try and compete with the idea of deep breathing because I strongly agree with that. I would go back to the Margaret Mead quote. Margaret Mead was an anthropologist, and she's very much been a lodestar of mine for years. And she said, never doubt that a small group of committed people can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that has. So don't lose faith that committed, credible, thoughtful citizens can make a difference.
Excellent. Robin?
I once had to say I'm a Gramscian, a pessimist of the mind, but optimist of the will, as they say. So I think tapping on both those comments, willpower can make a difference. I would add, you know, it is better to face up to risks and confront them and absorb them, and then have that capacity to have people around you to support you than to pretend they're not there. The worst thing is when you're shocked by something bad happening. Better to be inoculated.
I will tell you an anecdote. In the mid-1990s, I was out in Akasaka drinking with a bunch of politicians. And the boss of my former boss, Prime Minister Nakasone, walked in. And you remember in the sort of 94 era, you know, America was rising, China was rising, and Japan was falling, you know, off the cliff. And so I mustered all my little stamina. And I said, well, Nakasone, you know, what are you going to do, right, with all this rising around you, right? And he very wisely took a bottle of sake and poured it to everybody. We did a big kampai. And then he literally said to me, Jesper, we will keep doing what we're doing and wait for them to fuck it up. Now, in all seriousness, you know, and I'm sorry to be so personal, another mentor of mine, Kosaka Masataka from Kyoto University, you know, we were talking about whether the glass is half full or half empty. And as you know, as an optimist, I always think the glass is half full. And of course, when I talk to the Keidanren or anybody of sense in Japan, they always tell me the glass is half empty, right? But my sensei actually said it's not whether the glass is half full or whether the glass is half empty. The question is whether you can fill it up. And I think in this world, you are absolutely right. There are big forces going on. There are big disruptions going on. But what this means is that it behooves all of us in our little world, and whether it's with your loved ones, whether it is with your community, whether it is with your company, to actually make the world a better place. Whether you can make the world a better place can only happen if each and every little part of the world actually starts to get better. And in these harsh times where there are, and I'm sorry, I'm German, I'm not allowed to use the word, right? Where there are people doing a massive power grab, right? It's not about the resistance against it, but it's about actually leading by example that a better form of leadership is actually possible. And that behooves all of us here at the G1 community, but also anywhere else. So it really is, the Japanese, right, concept, right, of not putting yourself first, of actually being inclusive, being mindful, to use this word, of the impact of on the community, on the entire ecosystem, yet still being ambitious. And I'll leave you with that. For the final thought, I think that, when you look at Japan, right? The one thing that Japan brings to the stage, amongst many other things, right, is what I call the 3 Ks. And no, that's not the Ku Klux Klan, right? That is Kokishin, Kaizen, and Kenkyo. Curiosity. What is actually going on? What is the truth amongst all this noise? Kaizen. Forget this big step revolution, but actually do your part to improve things incrementally. There's a lot more to be gained by incrementalism than by moving fast and breaking things. And then finally, Kenkyo, humility. Humility, which is what Japan brings to the table. Sensei here does not preach, he just leads by example, and boy, do you breathe deeply. Thank you very much. It's been a lot of fun, and I want to thank Gillian. Where's Gillian? I want to thank the wonderful panel, and I want to thank all of you. Thank you very much.